So the foundation of the monarchy is facing an unprecedented financial and legal earthquake. Honestly, the sheer scale of the offshore accounts leak has forced the palace into a corner they never anticipated. A consortium of international auditors released a massive cache of documents linking private royal estates to a labyrinth of undisclosed offshore trusts. So here where it gets interesting. The immediate consequence was not just bad PR, it was the sudden legal seizure of specific royal properties by international tax authorities and crown estate regulators to freeze assets pending investigation. To protect the core of the institution, a drastic measure had to be taken. Let me take you behind the closed doors of the king's private study at Clarence House on the night the final decision was made. The atmosphere was absolute zero. There was no yelling, no theatrics, just the crushing weight of institutional survival. King Charles sat behind his heavy mahogany desk, looking visibly aged by the week's events. Before him lay a highly sensitive legal document, drafted urgently by the monarch's senior legal counsel. This document was an emergency asset severance agreement concerning Queen Camilla. The offshore leak had specifically traced a series of compromised shell companies back to trusts tangentially associated with her pre-royal financial portfolio, which had recently been merged with certain Duchy of Cornwall's secondary assets. Because of this administrative overlap, international regulators were threatening to freeze the entire Duchy's operational capital. Why did he sign it? It was a matter of pure, cold mathematics and constitutional duty. To save the broader crown estate and prevent the total financial paralysis of the monarchy, Charles had to legally sever Camilla's compromised trusts from the crown's protected assets. By signing the document, he was effectively allowing the seizure of two major private estates in Gloucestershire and a commercial holding in London, offering them up as collateral to satisfy the regulators. Standing by the fireplace watching this unfold was Prince William. His reaction was purely analytical, though his jaw was set tight. William understands that his future reign depends entirely on the financial stability of the Duchy of Cornwall. He did not object to the signing. In fact, palace insiders indicate William was the one who quietly urged the legal team to draft the severance quickly. He watched his father sign the papers with a grim sense of necessity. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was seated on one of the leather sofas, her posture perfectly straight, absorbing the reality of the situation. Her reaction was calculated and forward-looking. She asked only two questions to the legal counsel present. How long until the public finds out about the property seizure? And what is the exact communication strategy to distance the Wales household from the financial fallout? There was no emotional breakdown, just a precise focus on damage control and protecting the direct line of succession. The moment the pen lifted from the heavy parchment, the dynamic in the room shifted. Charles pushed the folder across the desk to his private secretary. Queen Camilla was not in the room at the time of the signing, a deliberate choice recommended by the lawyers to avoid any conflict of interest challenges. The king simply looked out the window into the dark courtyard. The deed was done. The properties were legally surrendered to the freeze, isolating the toxic financial leak from the rest of the royal family. What happens next is a meticulous restructuring of royal wealth. The seized properties will undergo a forensic audit that could take years. For the viewing public, this will be spun as a proactive step toward financial transparency, but behind those mahogany doors, everyone knows it was a desperate amputation to save the body of the monarchy. We will be tracking every single movement of the Crown estate regulators as this investigation deepens. The financial architecture of the royal family has permanently changed tonight. Stay tuned and again, subscribe for the most accurate, unfiltered analysis of this ongoing situation as we continue into the next phase of the investigation. Okay, so the immediate aftermath of the signing was swift and highly coordinated. As soon as the private secretary secured the document in a biometric briefcase, a secondary meeting was immediately convened in the adjacent drawing room. This was not a family gathering. This was a strategic summit involving the top tier of royal communications and two senior representatives from the Treasury. You have to understand the sheer logistical nightmare this leak caused. The offshore accounts were structured in a way that obscured the line between sovereign wealth and private enterprise. The Treasury officials laid out a stark reality. If the palace did not publicly acknowledge the asset seizure within 48 hours, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists was preparing to publish the exact coordinates of the seized estates, along with the operational details of the shell companies. Watching this from the corner of the room, you could see the shift in King Charles's demeanor. He transitioned from a husband making a difficult personal decision to a head of state managing a constitutional crisis. He instructed the communications director to draft a press release framing the severance not as a penalty, but as a voluntary restructuring to ensure absolute compliance with new, aggressive international tax frameworks. The strategy was to control the narrative before the media could weaponize the leak. Then, the briefing for Queen Camilla took place. She entered the room shortly after the Treasury officials departed. There was no emotional confrontation or dramatic pleading. The briefing was delivered directly by the King's senior financial advisor. Camilla was informed that the two Gloucestershire estates and the London commercial holding were now under the temporary jurisdiction of the Crown estate regulators, and her access to the associated accounts was suspended indefinitely. Her response was remarkably pragmatic. She asked for a clear delineation of her remaining, uncompromised assets and requested immediate independent audits of her charitable patronages to ensure no cross-contamination of funds had occurred. It was a cold, necessary accounting. Both Charles and Camilla understood that the survival of the institution superseded personal financial comfort. The conversation was entirely transactional, focusing on legal liabilities and asset protection. Meanwhile, William and Catherine had already moved to their private offices to execute their end of the strategy. Their objective was clear. They needed to maintain a schedule of highly visible, domestic public engagements to project absolute stability. Catherine was reviewing a list of upcoming charity visits, specifically selecting those focused on domestic economic hardship. This was a calculated move to ensure the optics of the Wales household remained grounded and entirely detached from the offshore wealth scandal. William was on a secure line with his own financial team for the Duchy of Cornwall. He ordered a complete internal review of every single external contractor and investment vehicle associated with his estate. The directive was absolute. He wanted zero vulnerability. He was actively building a firewall between his future reign and the current financial fallout gripping his father's administration, ensuring that the succession line remained untainted by the offshore leak. The legal team returned with the first draft of the public statement. The wording was incredibly precise, avoiding any admission of deliberate tax evasion while acknowledging the complexity of legacy offshore trusts. The palace was preparing to go to war not with the press, but with international financial regulators, using armies of corporate lawyers. We are going to monitor exactly how these regulators respond to the palace's maneuver. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss the next phase of this financial standoff. Okay, so, looking at the entire board now, we can see exactly how the institution has completely insulated itself from what could have been a fatal blow. The seizure of those royal properties was the price paid for structural survival. By legally severing Queen Camilla's legacy offshore trusts from the core Crown estate, King Charles executed a highly calculated risk management maneuver. He sacrificed secondary assets to protect the primary engine of the monarchy. To summarize the precise sequence of events behind those closed doors, it was a masterclass in corporate crisis management, void of any personal sentiment. The document signing was an operational necessity, driven entirely by the threat of international tax authorities freezing the duchy's operating capital. Prince William and Catherine recognized this immediately. Their only reaction was to pivot instantly into future-proofing the Wales household, establishing a strict public relations firewall and auditing their own internal contractors to secure the line of succession. Queen Camilla's role in the aftermath was equally transactional. Once briefed by the top financial advisors, she cooperated with the immediate suspension of her access to the seized Gloucestershire and London holdings, requesting independent audits of her remaining patronages to prevent cross-contamination. Every single member of the senior working royals acted as a corporate executive protecting a conglomerate, neutralizing the offshore leak through swift legal amputation rather than public defense. The long-term implications here are massive for the financial architecture of the royal family. The ongoing forensic audits of the seized properties will permanently redefine how the palace manages its private wealth versus sovereign assets. The public-facing narrative of voluntary restructuring is already being distributed to the global press. But the reality is that international regulators now have an unprecedented foothold inside the royal financial ledgers. This concludes our deep dive into the internal mechanics of the offshore leak and the subsequent property severance. If you want to keep tracking the financial strategies, legal maneuvers, and absolute facts behind how the royal institution operates, you need to subscribe to the channel right now. We will be updating you the second the results of those forensic audits are released. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for our next comprehensive analysis.